Roger Federer was watching. Every point, every swing, every ounce of heart witnessed live by the greatest to ever hold a racket. But it wasn't the Filipina teenager who admitted feeling the pressure of his gaze. It was the woman standing across the net from her. This is the story of a fairy tale that almost went all the way, and the champion who almost lost his focus because a legend was sitting a few feet away. To understand what happened on center court on July 6, 2026, you have to go back further. You have to go back to a court in the Philippines that wasn't built for champions. Makeshift, humble, nothing like the manicured lawns of the All England Club. That's where Eala learned to play tennis. Not in an academy in Florida, not under the watch of famous coaches from a young age. In a country with almost no history of producing Grand Slam contenders, in a sport where geography and infrastructure often decide destiny before a racket is ever picked up. And yet, here she was, 21 years old, standing in the fourth round of Wimbledon, the first Filipina in the tournament's history to make it this far. Getting here wasn't luck. It was a demolition of expectations, one match at a time. Just weeks before Wimbledon, Eala had strung together consecutive wins over Donna Vekic, the reigning Queen's Club champion, over Elena Rybakina, a former Wimbledon champion herself, and over Alina Svitolina, a proven Grand Slam semifinalist. 3 top 10 level scalps in a row. It wasn't a fluke, it was a signal. This player belonged. Then came the third round of Wimbledon itself, and the moment that turned Eala from a promising name into a story the entire tennis world was suddenly talking about. She faced Iga Świątek, not just any opponent, the reigning champion, a 5-time Grand Slam winner, one of the most dominant players of her generation. On paper, it should have been a coronation for Świątek. Instead, Eala delivered one of the most stunning upsets of the tournament, taking down the defending champion in a performance so composed, so fearless, that even seasoned commentators struggled to find the words. Suddenly, a nation was watching. Back in Manila, fans gathered in public watch parties just to catch a glimpse of her matches live. The Philippine Sports Commission organized a screening at Phil Sports Arena that could hold thousands of fans, all cheering for a young woman who had, in the span of a single tournament, become the biggest story in her country's sporting history. But history rarely hands out fairy tales without a final test, and Eala's final test at Wimbledon 2026 would come with an audience she never could have predicted, one that included the greatest player the sport has ever produced, sitting quietly in the royal box, about to watch the biggest match of her career. Would the magic hold, or was this as far as the story would go? Round of 16. Center court. The most famous tennis stage in the world. Waiting across the net was Jasmine Paolini, the 13th seed, a former Wimbledon finalist, a player with far more Grand Slam pedigree than most of Eala's previous opponents. This wasn't going to be an easy story to continue writing. And then, before a single ball was struck, something happened that changed the entire atmosphere of the match. Seated in the royal box, watching quietly among the assembled guests, was Roger Federer, an 8-time Wimbledon champion, arguably the most beloved player in the sport's history, a man whose mere presence at a match transforms it into an event. For most players, an audience like that would be a dream. For Paolini, it was something else entirely, a complication she hadn't expected to manage in the middle of a knockout match at the tournament she loves most. The first set began, and it was Paolini who drew first blood, breaking Eala's serve in the fourth game and riding that momentum to a 6-4 opening set. For a moment, it looked as though the fairy tale might end quietly, without much of a fight. But Eala hadn't come this far to fold under pressure, not from Paolini and not from the presence of a legend 15 rows back. What almost nobody in the stadium realized in that moment was what was happening inside Paolini's own head. Having grown up idolizing Federer, having modeled pieces of her own game and demeanor after him, she found herself fighting a battle on two fronts, one against the rising Filipina across the net, and one against her own nerves, knowing exactly who was watching. It's the kind of pressure that doesn't show up on a stat sheet. You can't measure it in aces or unforced errors, but it's real, and in a match this close, it can be the difference between advancing and going home. The question hanging over center court was simple. Could Eala use this moment, the crowd, the stakes, even the presence of tennis royalty as fuel, or would Paolini's experience and her ability to compartmentalize, even under the gaze of her childhood hero, prove to be the deciding factor? Nobody in that stadium knew yet how this would end. All anyone could do was watch and wait and feel the tension building with every single point. Down a set, Eala came out for the second with something different in her eyes. She wasn't just competing anymore, she was hunting. Every rally became a statement. Every point she won seemed to pull the crowd further and further onto her side, until center court, one of the most famously reserved sporting venues in the world, began to feel like it belonged to her. She leveled the match, forcing a decisive third set. And in doing so, she did something remarkable. She turned Roger Federer's presence in the royal box from a source of pressure into a source of theater. Every camera cut to him. Every point Eala won seemed to draw a reaction from the crowd around him. This wasn't just a tennis match anymore. This was a moment. Back home in the Philippines, the watch parties that had gathered to cheer her on erupted with every one game. Thousands of fans packed into an arena thousands of miles away from London, living and dying with every single point of a third set they had no control over. And for Paolini, the challenge only intensified. She later admitted, in the raw honesty that came after the match, that she had to consciously fight to stay present, to not let her mind drift toward the fact that her idol was watching every mistake, every hesitation, every moment of doubt. "He is my idol," she would say afterward, describing how she had to force herself to stay focused rather than think about his presence. Imagine that pressure. Imagine competing for a place in a Grand Slam quarterfinal against a rising star with the crowd firmly in her corner, all while trying not to think about the fact that the greatest player in the sport's history is watching your every move. This is what made the third set of this match so different from anything else at Wimbledon that year. Two competitors, both fighting battles beyond just tennis, Eala against the moment, Paolini against her own nerves, with a legend as the silent witness to it all. Which battle would be won first? The stadium held its breath as the deciding set began. Every fairy tale eventually meets its most difficult chapter, and for Eala, it arrived in the 8th game of the third set. The match had settled into a familiar rhythm, both players holding serve, trading blows, refusing to give an inch. But then, at 4 games apiece, Paolini finally found the gear she needed. She broke Eala's serve to move ahead 5 games to 3, and suddenly, the finish line was in sight for the Italian. It's worth pausing here to understand what was really happening. Paolini wasn't just outplaying an opponent, she was overcoming everything working against her in that moment. The crowd's overwhelming support for Eala, the emotional weight of a Filipina superstar's coming-out party, and yes, the added pressure of playing in front of her own tennis idol. To break serve at that exact moment, with everything stacked against her, was nothing short of remarkable composure. Eala fought. She always fought. But this time, the break held, and Paolini served out the match to complete a 6-4, 4-6, 6-3 victory, sealing her place in the quarterfinals. For a moment, the stadium went quiet, the kind of quiet that follows the end of something special. And then it happened. Center court rose to its feet. Not for the winner, though she certainly deserved her applause, but for Eala. A standing ovation from a crowd that had watched a 21-year-old from the Philippines rewrite what was possible for her country's tennis history, one match at a time. Eala blew kisses to the crowd as she left the court. It wasn't the ending anyone back home had hoped for, but it was, in its own way, exactly the ending her story deserved. A fall, but a fall from the height nobody expected her to reach in the first place. And in the royal box, Roger Federer had just watched all of it unfold, the rise, the fight, the heartbreak, from a seat that for one night had become the most talked-about vantage point at the entire tournament. In the moments after the match, still catching her breath on center court, Jasmine Paolini did something that transformed this entire story. She addressed, directly and honestly, exactly what it felt like to compete with Roger Federer watching from the royal box. She admitted that during the match, she had to actively remind herself to stay focused and not let his presence distract her. It's a small detail on the surface, a passing comment in a post-match interview, but it reveals something much larger about the emotional weight elite athletes carry, even at the absolute peak of their sport. Think about what Paolini's season had looked like before this match. It had been a difficult year for her, patchy form, fitness struggles, and no deep runs at the previous 4 Grand Slams. This win over Eala wasn't just a step toward the quarterfinals, it was a turning point in what had otherwise been a season defined by frustration. And she achieved that turning point while managing an entirely unique kind of pressure, playing not just against a red-hot opponent, but in front of the person she has modeled her own career after. That's not something that shows up in a box score. It's not something analysts can quantify. But anyone who has ever performed under the gaze of someone they deeply admire knows exactly how heavy that moment can feel. For Eala, the loss stings, but it doesn't erase what she accomplished. She didn't just compete in this match, she turned a legend's presence in the crowd into part of her own legacy. Years from now, when people talk about Alex Eala's breakthrough Wimbledon run, this match, the one played in front of Roger Federer, will be remembered as the moment the tennis world truly understood who she was. Sometimes the truth of a match isn't found in the final score. It's found in what the players admit afterward, when the adrenaline fades and honesty takes over. And in this case, the truth was simple. Both women were playing the match of their lives, and both were doing it under a pressure that had nothing to do with each other and everything to do with the man watching quietly from above.